would have been briefed about the whole situation. He's been king for several years. To just sit there and do nothing. They need to address this issue, and the only way I think they can get ahead of the narrative is for the king to stand down.
The palace knew this day would come, but nobody expected it to arrive this fast and this furiously. Charles sat before his own family and admitted the one thing a king should never have to say. He could no longer lead. Within hours, Camilla's future got dragged into the fire. William got pushed onto a throne he was not ready for. And a letter from Harry disappeared without a trace. And the secret buried inside that letter is the part of this story that could still bring this entire family down. The pen that would not move. A single sheet of paper was about to blow this family apart, and Charles hadn't even signed it yet. Inside a private room at Aldrich Palace, he sat at the head of a table, staring down at the one document that would end his reign. Around Charles sat the people who mattered most to him. William, Anne, and a handful of aides who already knew exactly what that paper meant. Nobody spoke. Nobody had to. The silence in that room said more than words ever could. Charles had already made peace with losing his crown. Months earlier, doctors had delivered a health diagnosis serious enough to force him to face his own mortality, and by that morning, he had accepted that his reign was ending. So this wasn't a decision he arrived at overnight. It came after long nights of quiet conversations with the few people he trusted most. Charles had wept over it once, alone, and never again. And by the time he walked into that room, the grief over losing the throne itself had already been buried deep enough that it no longer showed on his face. So why was his hand frozen over the pen, like it had turned to stone? Why couldn't a man who had already accepted his fate just sign his name and walk away? The answer to these questions will surely leave you speechless. Because buried inside that same document sat a clause that had nothing to do with Charles, and everything to do with tearing Camilla's life apart. The second he signed, control of her household budget and her own staff would get ripped away and handed straight to William. Camilla would lose her money, she would lose her people, and she would lose all of it in the same breath that ended her husband's reign. Charles read the clause twice, then a third time, as if repetition alone might change the words sitting on the page in front of him. It didn't. The language was cold, precise, and final, written by someone who understood exactly how much damage those few sentences would cause and decided to bury them deep inside a much longer document, hoping nobody would notice until it was already too late to undo. To make matters worse, a stranger sat quietly at the far end of the table, and nobody had bothered explaining who he was. He was a constitutional lawyer, brought in specifically to handle abdication cases, and his presence alone told Charles everything he needed to know. Men like that don't get summoned for casual conversations. They get summoned when decisions have already hardened into something close to law, when the room has moved past discussion and into execution. So this document was never Charles's idea. Someone else built it, someone else planned every detail, and someone else decided Camilla's fate long before Charles ever sat down at that table. What kind of family lets that happen to one of its own without a single word of warning? William stared at his father's hand hovering over the page, and confusion and frustration crashed into each other inside his chest. He had waited his whole life to carry this weight, so why wouldn't his father just let it go? William had spent years preparing for exactly this moment, studying the mechanics of rule, sitting through briefings that stretched late into the night, learning how to carry a nation's weight on shoulders that were never given a choice in the matter. And now, at the very moment it should have finally arrived, his father was stalling. But watching his father's jaw tighten and his eyes lock onto that clause, William felt something shift in his understanding. This wasn't a man clinging to power. This was a man fighting to protect the one person still standing beside him. Anne wasn't about to let the silence drag on any longer. So she leaned toward her brother and told him straight. "Wait too long," she warned, "and this room will remember you as the king who couldn't even sign his own name." Anne's words landed sharp and fast, because she understood something the others hadn't grasped yet. Every second Charles sat frozen, the crown looked weaker in front of the very people meant to protect it, and a weak crown invites chaos nobody can control. Anne had seen enough royal history to know that hesitation at the top rarely stays private for long. It leaks, it spreads, and by the time it reaches the public, it no longer looks like caution, it looks like collapse. Charles looked down at that page one final time. Then he set the pen down, untouched and unsigned. This had nothing to do with clinging to a throne he had already let go of in his heart. This was about refusing to let his wife get stripped down and thrown aside on his way out the door. Nobody at that table expected this to be the line Charles would finally draw, and that left one question burning through the room, one nobody wanted to say out loud. If Charles didn't write that clause, and if he never approved that plan, then somebody else did it in his name, without his knowledge, while he still sat on the throne. So who exactly had that kind of power? And if they had already gone this far behind his back, what else had they already decided for him without ever asking? The leak that forced their hand. To understand how that document ended up on the table, we need to rewind the clock a little. Charles's health had been quietly falling apart for over a year, and this wasn't some secret kept hidden from him. He knew every detail of what was happening inside his own body, and so did the tight circle of doctors and aides working beside him in total secrecy. What started as routine checkups slowly turned into something far more serious, and by the time the full diagnosis came in, everyone involved understood there was no version of the future where Charles carried on as king indefinitely. What Charles didn't know was just how much these same people had been planning behind his back while he stayed focused on staying alive. Senior courtiers had started drafting the transition paperwork long before Charles gave his formal blessing to any of it. That means the document kept growing on its own, quietly picking up new clauses and new conditions, including the one designed to strip Camilla of her budget and her staff, all while Charles remained completely in the dark about it. But these courtiers weren't acting out of malice, at least not all of them. Some genuinely believed they were protecting the institution by preparing for every possible outcome in advance. But somewhere along the way, protecting the institution turned into deciding the fate of people who never got a seat at that table. Isn't it terrifying to think a king can lose control of his own ending before he even realizes the ending has already started without him? Then things turned even darker. Weeks before any of this reached the public, Harry reportedly sent his father a letter. According to insiders close to the family, this letter was a genuine attempt to fix years of damage between them, a private olive branch meant only for Charles's eyes. Sources close to Harry claim he rewrote that letter more than once, agonizing over every word, and searching for a way to finally close the distance between them after years of public silence and private pain. But that letter never made it to Charles. Someone intercepted it along the way, read it, judged it, and buried it before Charles ever knew it existed. Who dares to steal a father's last chance to make peace with his own son? And while that letter sat hidden somewhere deep inside the palace, Camilla wasn't sitting around waiting to find out what would happen to her next. She had already started quietly building her own office, pulling in loyal staff who answered to her and nobody else. This wasn't about grabbing power for the sake of it. This was survival instinct kicking in early. Camilla had watched enough palace history unfold from the inside to know that titles can be stripped away far faster than they're given, and that the people who survive these moments are the ones who prepare long before the crisis actually arrives. She could feel the ground shifting beneath her feet long before anyone confirmed it out loud, and she was determined not to get caught standing there empty-handed. Then everything exploded into public view all at once, and it all started with reporters noticing strange changes to royal schedules. That was enough to set off whispers about sealed briefings, and those whispers leaked out to the press faster than the palace could contain them. Journalists began cross-referencing canceled appearances with unusual staff movements, and piecing together a puzzle the palace was desperate to keep hidden. But before the palace could even agree on how to handle it, the story was already slipping out of their hands. Backed into a corner, they rushed out a cold, hurried statement confirming the transition was underway, the same statement they were still arguing over behind closed doors just minutes before it went public. To everyone watching from the outside, this looked like a clean, calm announcement. But strip away that polished statement and you'll find a family already tearing itself apart at the seams. The public got their headline, but inside those palace walls, a missing letter and a father's growing suspicion were about to collide head-on, and no camera would ever capture what happened next. The room where no one shouted. Behind a closed door, far from advisors, far from Camilla and far from Anne, Charles and William finally stood face to face, completely alone. Charles had walked in, still clinging to hope that he could slow this whole thing down. Maybe buy a little more time before the rest of the world found out everything. William walked in already knowing the brutal truth. This transition had moved too far for hope or emotion to stop it now. The two men stood there for a moment without speaking, each one waiting for the other to break first, each one aware that whatever got said next could never be taken back. And it was in this room that the truth about Harry's letter finally clawed its way to the surface. William learned in the exact same breath as his father that Charles had never laid eyes on the letter his younger son had sent him months earlier. A senior aide had intercepted it, deciding on his own that it would be nothing but a distraction during such a fragile time for the family. The aide, according to sources familiar with the matter, later defended the decision as an act of protection, insisting Charles already had enough weighing on him without adding a fractured relationship into the mix. Whether that reasoning holds up or simply masks a deeper pattern of control is a question the family may never fully answer. Neither father nor son had hidden this from each other on purpose. They uncovered this betrayal together, and the weight of it landed on both of them at the exact same moment. "You never even saw it?" William asked, his voice sharp with disbelief. Charles could only shake his head slowly, because for the first time, he realized just how much control had slipped through his fingers without him even noticing it happening. And that was when Charles finally said the words that would define this entire chapter of his life. He looked his son dead in the eye and admitted he could no longer lead. This wasn't a broken man waving a white flag in surrender. This was a man finally speaking a truth that had been building inside him for months. William didn't rush to fill the silence between them, because nothing he could say in that moment would make the sting of it hurt any less. There was a strange kind of relief buried inside the confession, too, like the relief of a man who no longer pretended to carry something he could no longer hold. Outside that room, power kept shifting fast, and it wasn't slowing down for anyone's feelings. New authority files confirmed certain decisions no longer needed Charles's signature at all anymore. Camilla even discovered her name had been dragged off an important meeting list without a single word of warning, and in that instant she understood the palace had rewritten the rules overnight without ever asking for her permission. She reportedly confronted two senior aides directly and demanded answers, only to be met with carefully rehearsed answers designed to protect the institution rather than explain themselves to her. If building her own office had been about protection, this was the moment Camilla realized protection alone wasn't enough anymore. So her team moved fast and hard, and according to sources close to the household, they began negotiating a separate financial settlement, quietly building her an exit before anyone officially admitted Camilla would even need one. To some aides watching this unfold in real time, it stopped looking like self-preservation and started looking more like betrayal, playing out right under their noses. As if the family hadn't been pushed to the edge already, Princess Catherine received her own private briefing about the children, and this one went far beyond simple talk about titles and public duties. According to unconfirmed reports, this briefing touched on ramping up the children's security in a serious way, driven by a specific threat assessment that has never once been made public to this day. Catherine reportedly asked direct questions about the nature of the threat, and was given only partial answers, enough to justify the added security without enough detail to fully understand what her family might actually be facing. But what exactly triggered that conversation behind closed doors? Nobody outside a tiny circle seems to know, and that question still hangs over this entire story, completely unanswered. William finally spoke the only words that felt true in that moment. He said they would do this properly. But properly no longer meant clean or simple, not anymore. It meant carrying a crown built on top of a father he could no longer fully trust, a brother possibly lost forever because of a decision neither of them had actually made, and a stepmother whose entire future was being decided in rooms she wasn't even allowed to enter anymore. The crown hadn't fallen, not yet, but something far more dangerous than any abdication had just been set loose inside that palace, and by the time those doors finally opened again, nobody left standing in that room could say for certain who was really pulling the strings.